Welcome to Everything Casual, bringing you original football casual videos from the golden era of the 80s and 90s, right up to current day. Football away day stories and historic clashes between football firms. Subscribe so you don't miss out. We upload videos every week.
The
Celtic have always had ultras. Celtic have had ultras going back almost since we were founded. With the break clubs. Stories were written about them. It's not that they were feared, but they came from very downtrodden parts of Glasgow and North Lanarkshire. And they were vivid, but club adherence to a club was fairly alien. And then when football got established, the kind of fervour of that section of the support that went in the break clubs, with the colours, with the flag of Ireland, singing the songs, the cultural, the religious, the political.
Welcome back. Today we are looking at Celtic and their history of football hooligan firms, including the Celtic Soccer Crew, the Style Mile Vandals, the Green Brigade, and the Boys Celtic. They have been more active than people realise over the years, especially in the golden age of football violence. They then went quiet for a long time, but are now back in big numbers, and a lot of people think that Celtic now have the biggest firm in Scotland. When we talk about Celtic football firms, we have to start with John O'Kane, one of the founder members of the Celtic Soccer Crew. Let's listen to a few of his stories. These are his own words. It was near the end of the year 1984, and just about every other team in Scotland seemed to have a casual following. Aberdeen and Motherwell would come mob-handed to Celtic Park and run amok. There were pockets of Celtic fans who would offer some resistance, but it was unorganised and consisted of small groups from different housing schemes in Glasgow who were probably more interested in fighting each other. I was part of a group that went to all the games. We originated from children's homes and the tough housing scheme of Pollock. We were all wannabe casuals and up for a fight, but we lacked organisation and numbers. This was all to change, mostly due to a chance encounter with Aberdeen one afternoon in Glasgow. A crowd of us had arranged to meet in an amusement arcade in the city centre, under the bridge at Central Station. We were too young to meet at a pub, as most of us ranged from about 14 to 17. We were milling about when we became aware of a group of Aberdeen casuals heading towards the bridge from Buchanan Street. There were a couple of hundred of them, distinctive in their smart Pringle jumpers and red ski hats with the bobbles ripped from them. The younger ones came into the amusement arcade, swaggering about and looking for trouble. There were about 15 of us at this time, and we were all up for a fight. Some jostling, and then a number of skirmishes broke out and quickly spilled into the street. Even though we were outnumbered, we stood our ground, and I remember going toe-to-toe with one guy in particular. He was a wee stocky guy with specs wearing a Burberry jacket. As we were exchanging punches, more Aberdeen appeared from the pub. They chased us to the Hope Street end of the bridge. We had a bit of luck as there was a skip lying there that contained an array of weapons. We armed ourselves with poles and bars and ran towards Aberdeen. They were taken by surprise, but stood their ground. A running battle followed, but didn't last long, as the police arrived quickly on the scene. Aberdeen, to their credit, also had a go at the cops. This deflected attention away from us, and provided the opportunity for us to escape without any nickings. This was my first taste of football violence, and I suppose it must compare with a junkie taking his first hit. The high was unbelievable. The difference with me, however, was now I was truly hooked. I would go on to experience the same level of high on many more occasions over the years, unlike the addicts who go chasing their first hit forever. When we got to the game, we couldn't stop talking about the fight we'd just had. We even decided to leave the match 10 minutes from time to go to the London Road end and wait for Aberdeen on their way out. We had a mob of about 20 or 30 looking for a fight. This ranged from mods, punks and wannabe casuals to a few veterans of the boot boy era. We didn't see ourselves as an organised mob, just a crowd of people who were up for a battle. The coppers controlled the crowd outside without giving us any chance of a fight. They escorted Aberdeen down London Road and shepherded us onto a bus. Due to the after-match traffic, the bus took ages to get along the road, allowing Aberdeen, who were walking, to get ahead of us. We were approaching Bridgerton Cross when a group of Aberdeen, who looked like they had slipped their escort, started to taunt the Celtic supporters on the bus. The bus was packed with all sorts of Celtic fans, and at first they just sang loudly and banged the windows. Then all of a sudden, someone standing close to me swung himself up, using the handrail, and booted a window out. It didn't take long until just about every window on the bus had been booted out, and everyone was clambering out of the bus, using exits they had just made for themselves. I think Aberdeen got a shock when they realised that this wasn't just another crowd of booze-filled scarfers, but a mob that was up for a battle. However, they were more experienced in this type of fight, whereas we fought mostly as individuals. The police were again on the scene quickly and soon had things under control. That may have been the end of that particular fight, but it was the beginning of something much bigger. Like the helpless junkie, I had experienced this high, and I craved my next hit. We had arranged to meet at about 1 o'clock in the station. Our crowd consisted of the usual 15 plus a couple of new recruits, all resplendent in our new tracksuits and Pringles. When we got to the station concourse, we noticed small groups of lads milling about. It was as if there was an air of uncertainty and a lack of leadership. We recognised a few faces among each of the groups and called them over, where they each introduced themselves. We travelled through to Paisley with a mob of 70 for our first game together as Celtic casuals. However, the reception we got at Love Street was unexpected and frightening. We were expecting a fight with St Mirren, and we were swaggering around as though we were invincible. But what happened next was unbelievable. We were in the shed next to the fence separating both sets of supporters, taunting St Mirren and bouncing about like a bunch of excited kids, when all of a sudden there was a chant of "Casuals, casuals, get to F." This wasn't from St Mirren, but from our own fans who were beginning to surround us in a very menacing way. The average age of our mob was about 16, and here we were surrounded by drink-fueled veterans of the terrace who apparently hated us. A couple of skirmishes broke out, and we were chased onto the track by the scarfers. The police intervened and escorted us out of the stadium and to the train station, where we were herded onto the first train to Glasgow. A couple of lads were nursing black eyes and bloody noses. The rest of the day was pretty uneventful, and ended with a few of us going for a pint in order to discuss plans for the next game and what we had learned from the day's events. We got knockbacks from all the pubs in the city centre, so we eventually decided to try an Irish bar on the south side of the Jamaica Bridge. It was called the Country Corner, and we got in without any trouble. We talked about our unexpected enemy, the Celtic support, a support that guarded its reputation and good name, with a passion that we hadn't reckoned with, even as Celtic supporters ourselves. The St Mirren game was in January 1985, just weeks after the shocking events that surrounded a European Cup Winners' Cup match against Rapid Vienna. These were the darkest days in Celtic's proud European history. Having disposed of Belgium's Ghent in the first round, Celtic were paired with Austria's Rapid Vienna in the next round. The first leg was played in Vienna in October 1984, with Rapid recording a 3-1 win. Celtic were optimistic about progressing thanks to the away goal scored by Brian McClare. The second leg was at Celtic Park on the 7th of November 1984. An expectant crowd turned up in numbers and weren't disappointed as Celtic went 2-0 ahead, with goals from Brian McClare and Murdo McLeod in a fantastic first half. After the break, Tommy Burns made it 3 with about 20 minutes to go. The game looked a foregone conclusion when Celtic were awarded a penalty 5 minutes after the Burns goal. The Rapid players surrounded the referee, who was consulting his linesman on the jungle side of the pitch. Suddenly, one of the Rapid players fell to the ground as if he had been struck by a sniper's bullet. He lay there for over 10 minutes before leaving the field covered in bandages. Peter Grant then missed the penalty, screwing his shot wide, understandable, given he had waited 15 minutes to take the kick. Celtic held on to their 3-0 lead and were looking forward to the next round. The following day, news broke that Rapid had complained to UEFA, claiming their player had been struck with a bottle thrown from the crowd in the jungle. TV pictures, which UEFA apparently never viewed, clearly showed a bottle landing on the pitch, but nowhere near any Rapid players. Incredibly, UEFA ordered the match to be replayed, with the venue instructed to be over 100 kilometres outside Glasgow. Old Trafford was the chosen venue, the largest travelling support for an away European tie, 40,000 plus, made the journey south. Celtic inevitably lost the match, with Rapid scoring from a breakaway following a Celtic corner, from which Roy Aitken rattled the post so hard that the ball rebounded upfield to an unmarked Rapid player, who sprinted away unchallenged to score the only goal of the game. As the match passed away, tensions got to some of the Celtic fans, with at least 3 separate people running onto the pitch in an attempt to attack the Rapid players. Celtic were punished again by UEFA and ordered to play their next European home game behind closed doors. As for Rapid, they made it all the way to the final, where they were beaten by Everton. The emergence of a group of casuals was the last thing the Celtic fans wanted. They knew that any adverse publicity connected to crowd trouble could result in Celtic being banned altogether by UEFA. As the crew developed, so did the disapproval aimed at us from the Celtic support. They made it clear that the casuals were not welcome. Before we carry on with more stories from John O'Kane on the formation of the Celtic soccer crew, I just want to quickly mention a very special part of the Celtic ground, called the jungle. It was a very special section, very intimidating, and a very naughty place indeed. Here's more. The jungle was the nickname for the standing enclosure on the north side of Celtic Park, home to the most passionate and vocal Celtic supporters. This area was renowned for its electric atmosphere and was a breeding ground for the club's most fervent fans. During the 1970s and 1980s, the jungle was associated with football hooliganism in Scotland. It was notorious for violent confrontations, especially with rival supporters from Rangers, which marred Scottish football during that era. Many of the early Celtic lads who were into fighting and trouble on match days came from that section, so over time, the name The Jungle also became loosely associated with the early era of Celtic's hooligan presence, before groups like the CSC were formally organised. The demolition of the jungle to comply with the Taylor Report caused significant emotional distress among fans, as it meant the end of a cherished and familiar part of the stadium. Let's get back to John O'Kane, with a few more stories about being in the firm in the early days, and then we will move on to mobs that came after the CSC. The things we did achieve in those early days, however, would go on to play a major part in my life for the next 20 years. We had created a mob that lacked leadership and guidance. This was due to the fact that we had people from different housing schemes who didn't trust one another because of the history of territorial gang fighting in Glasgow. It also has to be admitted that we attracted some nutters and undesirables who were only interested in robbing many of the younger, well-dressed recruits of their money and belongings. Throughout the next couple of weeks, we grew from the initial 70 to a mob of hundreds. A group of us recognised that we needed organisation and started to produce a newsletter that we distributed among the various crews. Looking back on it now, it seems very naive and looks like jailbait, especially in the light of the undercover operations that the police had mounted in England in a bid to stamp out football hooliganism. We did, however, manage to establish a certain level of control over the crew. The next step was to set up a base where we could meet regularly. We decided upon the country corner as it was close to the city centre, and meant that people from the various schemes could meet without fear of attack from rival gangs. The pub was basically a bit of a dive, but most of us were allowed to drink there, even though many of us were underage. The country corner would play a major part in the growth of the Celtic casuals. We then had to decide on a name, and I hold up my hands and wholeheartedly apologise for coming up with the original title of Roman Catholic Casuals. This lasted for the first couple of months until it became apparent that half the mob was Protestant. We decided to change the name, and a lot of suggestions were put forward for consideration. This ranged from the Celtic soccer trendies, which if you'd seen half our mob, you'd realise how inappropriate that title was, to us toying with the name Kosh. Celtic's organised soccer hooligans, which was also dismissed. We eventually decided to go with CSC, Celtic Soccer Crew, and the name has stuck with us ever since. The country corner was now recognised as our base to such an extent that we would continue to meet there for a drink when there wasn't a game on. The owner was a big Irish guy who was willing to bend the rules for a quick profit. He did, however, draw the line with those among us who looked just that bit too young to be in a pub. This led to a large crowd of younger lads feeling a bit left out of things. They began to meet around the city centre and soon established the Celtic Baby Crew. Another group of lads would not be seen in the country corner, and they found a pub in the city centre, which led to us nicknaming them the Sylvester's Shirties. This in effect meant that we had 3 separate mobs meeting at different locations, and there was a complete lack of communication and leadership. This led to us being turned over by most that came to Celtic Park. Our trips to away matches, however, were much more fruitful. This was mainly due to the football specials that were put on for football supporters to travel to and from games at a special cheap rate. One day in particular, we were due to play Kilmarnock at Rugby Park and had arranged to meet inside Central Station. It was a week of snow and frost, and inevitably the match was called off the day before. We were at a loss and wondering where to go, when someone suggested that we should head to Carlisle, who happened to be playing Millwall that Saturday. These were the days before mobile phones, and it was quite an achievement that we managed to gather 30 lads together at such short notice. We met early the next morning and travelled first class on the intercity train, much to the annoyance of the middle-class businessmen who normally had the first-class compartments to themselves, and who expected to have a quiet journey. There were about 30 of us on the train, but others had decided to make their own way to Carlisle by car and bus and meet up with the rest of us there. We hadn't left Glasgow unnoticed though, and were greeted in Carlisle by the local constabulary. We got off the train and were lined up against a wall where we were all searched and had our carry-outs confiscated. Me and my mate Joey were arrested because we only had children's tickets. We were given the option of either paying for full adult tickets or being charged with fraud. We didn't have enough money between us to pay for the tickets, so it looked like we were going to miss out on the day's fun. But then, to our surprise, one of the officers who had been searching the others came into the office and said that our mates had had a whip round and paid for our tickets. We were soon on the streets of Carlisle causing mayhem. We found a pub on the main street and quickly had it under control. A few Carlisle lads were soon on the scene to check us out. They were more inquisitive than threatening. Carlisle told us that Millwall were due in at about 2 and asked us to team up with them and have a go at the Londoners. There was an uneasy truce established, but we could already sense that it wasn't going to last. The numbers on both sides grew steadily as more lads arrived. The pub was absolutely mobbed, and it wasn't long before the police arrived to take up positions outside. This was a new experience for the Celtic boys. In Glasgow, the police would have entered the pub and arrested anyone that even looked at them the wrong way. The Carlisle cops seemed more content to contain us in a large crowd without risking confrontation. Our mob now numbered about 40, because a few of the Shirties had made their own way down after hearing about our trip. At 2, both mobs left the pub and attempted to get to the train station, but the police had every move covered. A group of about 50 to 100 Millwall had travelled by train and were escorted onto buses waiting for them at the station. We had no chance of a pop at Millwall, which was probably just as well, as they looked old enough to be our dads. Our disappointment was to be short-lived, as we decided to have a go at Carlisle instead. The tension had been building all day, and it didn't take much prompting for us to kick it off. I think we took them by surprise as they were quickly on their toes. The police were also taken by surprise, as they had been concentrating on keeping us away from Millwall. A couple of Carlisle did try to stand, but they were easily dealt with, and Celtic's first victory on English soil was won. None of our lads was injured or lifted in the fight. The police were uncertain about what to do with us. If they'd had any brains, they would have put us on the first available train back to Glasgow. But what they did next was unbelievable. For some unknown reason, they decided to open a terrace behind one of the goals, just for us. What followed is one of the most bizarre things I have ever experienced in a football stadium. Carlisle were in the shed to our left, with the tartan rug brigade in the main stand to our right. I can't remember where the small pocket of Millwall were put in the stadium. We decided that, as we were there, we might as well enjoy ourselves, so we started a lung-bursting rendition of You'll Never Walk Alone. A couple of lads had brought banners with them, and some had scarves. I don't know what the locals made of us, but I could safely say that anyone who was at the match would most likely have forgotten the score by now, but will still be able to recall the antics of the Celtic lads that day. The craziest thing we did was when we all stripped to the waist and performed a conga up and down the terrace. This was met with rapturous applause from all the other fans in the ground. At the end of the match, the police held us in the ground until the rest of the crowd had left. When they eventually let us out, the escort outnumbered us. We were entirely surrounded by police and had no chance of sneaking away. When we got to the city centre, we noticed large groups of Carlisle milling around, but they made no attempt to attack us. We were escorted all the way to the train station and onto the platform. The majority of the police escort, however, remained at the entrance to prevent us from slipping back out and into town. We were just standing around feeling quite pleased with the day's events, when suddenly a crowd of Carlisle came charging towards us from the car park exit ramp. After the ease of our previous victory, we were well up for it, and steamed right into them. Carlisle made a better attempt this time, but were nothing much. We soon had them on their toes again and heading back out of the station. When we returned to the platform, we were met with applause and chants of "Bushwhacker, Bushwhacker" coming from the adjacent platform, where Millwall were waiting for their train back to London. After a few minutes, our train arrived, and we were on our way back to Glasgow with plenty of backslapping and bragging to keep us going all the way home. We were all on an incredible high after what we had achieved that day. I would say that the 4-4 game was one of the best Old Firm games that I have ever had the pleasure of witnessing, purely from a football point of view. But it is one of the worst experiences that I have ever had to endure when it comes to the football violence side of things. We had a massive crew that day, as did Rangers and their ICF. On our journey to Ibrox, our firm numbered about 400. We were in a police escort, and the chances of having a go at the ICF were limited, although there were sporadic outbursts of violence. When we arrived at the stadium, our crew had to break up into loads of different groups. This was due to the large number of tickets that Celtic used to be allocated in the days before the Souness Revolution, which saw thousands of glory hunters flock to Ibrox. This meant that, in addition to the traditional Broomloan stand, we were also given tickets for sections of the Govan stand, main stand and enclosure. In total, about 17,000 briefs. After the match, it was already kicking off before most of our crew had even got out of the stadium. The Celtic lads who didn't have tickets had been in a pub, the Mucky Duck, which was on Broomloan Road close to the junction with Paisley Road. When the final whistle went, they had left the pub and were involved in running battles with Rangers fans and some ICF. Some of the lads who were at the game managed to reach the place where the battle was going on just as the police arrived. The coppers surrounded the Celtic crew, which numbered several hundred, and hemmed them in with help from the mounted division, preventing any of the lads from slipping away. That left about 80 of our crew who hadn't been involved in the fracas. We didn't fancy attracting the same attention from the police that the majority of the crew were getting. In an effort to escape any police escort, we decided to make our way across the bridge that took us into Dumbreck, an affluent area on the south side of Glasgow, separated from the poorer Brox area by the M8 motorway. The plan was to head through the quiet streets towards a footbridge that would bring us back across the M8 and on to Paisley Road, close to the Cessnock Underground station. There were about 20 younger boys with us who were members of the Celtic baby crew. I think they felt they needed to prove themselves to the older boys in the crew. When we turned onto the road that would lead us to the footbridge, we noticed groups of Rangers fans making their way home from the match. The babes decided to have a go at the Rangers fans and began to chase them towards the bridge. The rest of us in the crew knew that it was not worth our while chasing scarfers. Meanwhile, the babes had reached the footbridge and followed the running Rangers fans onto it. They were by now a good distance in front of us when we heard the distinctive wail of police sirens, becoming louder the closer we got to the bridge. At this point, we could see the babes involved in a battle with older Rangers scarfers, who seemed to have come to the rescue of the ones that had been chased by the baby crew. As the 60 or so of us got to the access point of the bridge, a police car, quickly followed by a van, mounted the pavement in front of us, blocking our way onto the footbridge with the vehicles. What happened next is one of the most sickening experiences that I have ever witnessed. A number of the ICF had now joined in the battle against the Celtic baby crew, who were attempting to put up a good fight. The ICF then fired a flare into the 20 or so babes, which forced them to take to their toes and run back towards the end of the bridge where we were. However, one of the baby crew had tripped and fallen to the ground. He was soon surrounded by the Rangers mob and was taking a really bad beating. Those of us who were being prevented from going on the bridge surged forward in an attempt to break through the police line. The coppers drew their truncheons, making it impossible for anyone to go to our mate's help. We could do nothing but stand there helpless, as we watched a couple of the Rangers lads pick up the Celtic babe and toss him over the footbridge railing. Thank God. He was close to the far end of the bridge, meaning he landed on the sloping grass embankment and not on one of the 8 lanes of the M8 motorway. I felt particularly responsible, because the young lad who received that terrible beating would probably not have been involved with the Celtic hooligans if he had not been in the same children's home as me. We didn't get an opportunity that day for our revenge on the ICF for what they had done. We would, however, have an unexpected chance about 6 weeks later. The memory of what happened back in March was still fresh in our minds, and we vowed that we wouldn't make the same mistakes this time. The plan was for several meeting places in various pubs in the city centre that could accommodate up to 50 lads at a time without drawing too much attention. At about 6:30, the various groups were to make their way to the agreed meeting point, which was at the bandstand on the River Clyde walkway. Once we had grouped up, we had a firm in excess of 300. We made our way from the city centre and towards Ibrox, walking down one-way streets into the oncoming traffic, which we hoped would allow us to avoid a police escort. We knew we had a good crew, and we were determined to put on a good show. We got to the Kingston Bridge, which is about 2 miles from Ibrox, without attracting an escort. There were some policemen on foot, but still no sign of the van loads or the mounted division, which usually accompanied us on our journey to Ibrox Stadium. As we passed under the Kingston Bridge, there were some missiles being tossed at us from Rangers scarfers who had come out of a pub close to Paisley Road Toll. The scarfers, however, were content just to throw the various objects at us before retreating into the relative safety of the pub, pulling down the shutters in the process. the general feeling amongst our crew was to ignore the scarfers in the pub. We knew that we had done well to get this far without attracting an escort. As we got closer to Paisley Road Toll, you could sense the tension building amongst the crew. The old boys were barking out instructions, telling everyone to close in and for the younger ones to take up position in the middle of the crew. For the majority of lads in the CSC that night, it was the first time that we had attempted to walk down Paisley Road without the relative safety that a police escort provides. We could see people pouring out of the pubs that lined both sides of the road ahead and stood between us and Ibrox Stadium. The crew began to sing some song in an effort to stir up the troops and get the adrenaline pumping as we prepared ourselves for the gauntlet that we were about to run. The Rangers fans outnumbered us by at least 5-1, but they weren't acting as one unit, whereas we were. We stuck together and managed to fight off the Rangers scarfers who were attempting to attack us. The atmosphere was very intimidating and volatile, but nevertheless we managed to get past all the pubs without any casualties. Although we hadn't turned over the Rangers scarfers or taken one of their pubs, the crew still felt that we had achieved a moral victory gained by the simple fact we stuck together and maintained a certain level of discipline. We had now reached the fork in Paisley Road. One way continues as Paisley Road and would have been the sensible route for us to take as it meets with Broomloan Road, which is the traditional Celtic end, whereas the other way takes you to Edmiston Drive, past the main entrance to Ibrox Stadium, and is the preferred route for Rangers fans. Buoyed up by our success at passing all the pubs relatively unscathed, we decided to head down Edmiston Drive, and, not just with the usual singing and goading, some wisecrack in our crew thought that it would be a laugh if we all put our arms around each other's shoulders and sang the Sinatra classic, New York, New York. I think the Rangers scarfers were so bemused by our antics that they thought better of challenging us. We eventually got to the Celtic end and made plans for everybody to leave the match just before the end. However, after 90 minutes, the score was 2-2, meaning there would be 30 minutes extra time and possibly penalties. Ali McCoist scored his and Rangers' third to secure a 3-2 win for the home team. The majority of our crew still had the sense to make their way to the exits before the final whistle sounded. We grouped up and headed towards the junction of Paisley Road and Broomloan Road. The ICF, who had been anonymous before the match, suddenly appeared from one of the side streets. They must have had the about 200 to 300 in their firm, about the same number as us. A good toe-to-toe battle developed with flares and other missiles being discharged by both crews. Although it was an old firm match with a capacity crowd, the police appeared to be unprepared. It was as if they had treated the match as a reserve fixture and had deployed only a limited number of officers in accordance with what would normally be required. The battle raged on for what seemed an age. A couple of policemen on motorbikes tried to intervene, but soon realised that their efforts were more likely to put themselves in danger, especially when one of the motorbikes with the cop still on board was knocked to the ground as he tried to separate the two mobs by driving into the middle of the melee. Reinforcements eventually arrived and began arresting large numbers from both sides. Luckily for me and a few others, we managed to escape to the safety of one of our crew's house, which was in one of the flats that made up the housing scheme directly outside Ibrox Stadium. Strangely enough, there were a number of Celtic lads who lived in the vicinity of Ibrox Stadium, while a large proportion of the ICF hail from the East End of Glasgow. It was by now the end of season 1987 season. Our final league game was against Hearts at Tynecastle. A crowd of us had decided to travel through early and do a pub crawl. There must have been about 30 of us, but it was all game boys with a couple of girls in tow. We arrived in Edinburgh at about 11 in the morning and got off the bus near the zoo. We were on a mission and out to cause as much trouble as possible. We went into a couple of pubs but were asked to leave after our first pint. A few lads threw their glasses about, but there wasn't that much disorder. A couple of our lads decided to rob an off-sales for a drink, while the rest of us went to a pub called the Roseburn, which is a traditional Hearts pub. The Hearts mob must have heard about our early arrival and were soon on the scene, but not in big numbers. A few lads left the pub to confront them, but they ran off. We decided to stay at this pub and wait for the rest of our crew coming off the train. A short time later, Hearts came back towards the pub with what they must have regarded as a mob capable of turning us over. What they didn't know was a few of us were carrying flares. We left the pub and were soon involved in a fierce battle. It was absolute chaos, with flares going off and various weapons being used. We would have been turned over if it wasn't for the handheld flares that we had. The fight went on quite long in football terms until the police showed up. I wasn't aware of it happening, but it soon became clear that a Hearts lad had been badly cut up and stabbed. The police had us lined up against a wall and conducted an impromptu ID parade. Frank and his girlfriend were first to be picked out, the main reason being his girl was from Edinburgh and had run with Hearts. I was next to be pointed out along with one other guy, McLean. At this point, we didn't know what was happening because, although Frank and I had used the flares, none of us had been involved in the slashing. We were taken to the West End police station and held until the Tuesday when we would appear in court. The Hearts bird, Nick, got out as she was pregnant. This was a godsend to us, as she was able to provide us with food and refreshments and organise legal representation. The three of us weren't unduly worried, as we knew it was a set-up and they would soon realise their mistake. We were held in a massive cell, along with 3 Hibs boys who got arrested later on. When they first came into the cell, the atmosphere was uneasy. However, after a while, we were talking and even playing football against each other. We made a ball from sponge we took from a mattress and wrapped up in a carrier bag. We were that confident of getting out that we made the most of the time we had to spend in the cells. With Nick on the outside, she was able to organise legal representation, and Frank received a visit from a top lawyer in Edinburgh. It wasn't good news, as we were informed we were facing charges of serious assault and firearms due to the flares. We were given some hope though, as we learned that a couple of girls who had been with us had taken photos of the fighting and they could be in our favour. On the Tuesday morning, we were taken to Edinburgh Sheriff Court, where the 3 of us were put in a holding cell together. We were then served with an indictment, which was all new to us, and we didn't quite understand what was happening. The 3 of us had been charged with assault to inflict severe injury and danger to life, and also under possession of firearms and breach of the peace. Before I get into the Green Brigade and Boys Celtic, which we will do after this, I want to briefly jump forward to current day, because Celtic also have formed alliances with 2 major football firms, the Wrexham Frontline and the PSG Ultras, the Collectif Ultras Paris, or CUP. I don't know how the bond with the Paris Ultras was formed. Maybe a Celtic lad can let us know in the comments section, but it seems to be a strong friendship that's growing more and more each season. Earlier this month, when Villa played PSG at Villa Park, members of the CUP were seen wearing Celtic face coverings and Celtic balaclavas. It is also believed that members of the Green Brigade and Boys Celtic travelled to Paris to show their support against Aston Villa in the first leg of the Champions League clash. Paris Saint-Germain are also often shown displaying Green Brigade banners at games in their stadium in Paris. But the friendship between the PSG and Celtic lads goes way back longer than people realise. I have just found this article out from the year 2017. It reads like this. The French outfit put on a show in Glasgow as they ran out 5-0 winners over Brendan Rodgers' side on Tuesday night to open their Champions League campaign with a bang. Around 1,500 away fans made the trip to Parkhead, and members of Ultras group Collectif Ultras Paris have revealed that the welcome they received from the boys' support was everything they had hoped for, 22 years on from their last visit. Mika, the group's vice president, told French newspaper Le Parisien, "In every bar where there were guys from Celtic, they were buying us pints. Celtic, Liverpool and Dortmund are three mythical stadiums that breathe football. We knew, since the year 1995 match, that the Scots knew how to receive, and that we would be welcome. There is mutual respect even if during the game it was a beautiful battle of songs. Another fan, Patrice, said that the visit to Glasgow topped the list of his away day experiences so far. It was an incredible atmosphere, he said. They are very welcoming. The end of the match was really nice. This is the best trip of my life. PSG will welcome travelling Celtic supporters on the 22nd of November in the return fixture of their Group B encounter. I also found another article about the friendship that reads like this. Paris Saint-Germain's Ultras gave a nod to Celtic's boys group during a special anniversary tifo display. The renowned Nautica Paris fan group unfurled an impressive display during their Ligue 1 clash against Marseille last night. The massive tifo ran over 2 tiers of one of the stands in Le Parc des Princes. It was commemorating 10 years of the main PSG fan group, and the display featured a reference to Celtic. Eagle-eyed viewers spotted the green and white colours of the Parkhead side on an image of a supporter wearing a balaclava. PSG's tifo paid homage to different supporters groups around Europe, and Celtic were prominent among them. They have been behind various banners across the last decade in big Champions League and Scottish Premiership games. During Saturday's Scottish Premiership clash with Hibs, the boys group held up a banner paying tribute to the Nautica Paris fan group. It read, "On the waves we sail. Nautica, 10 years." All this doesn't explain how and why the alliance between the two set of ultras started. So if a Celt or a Cup lad can explain that to the viewers for us in the comment section, I would be grateful. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Celtic also have a bit of an alliance with the Welsh football hooligan group known as the Wrexham Front Line, but details are also a bit sketchy on that one, so again, if anyone can explain if this one is true or how it came about in the comment section, I would appreciate it. I do have this statement that I found online in a fan forum. It's from an actual Wrexham lad, and he does confirm the alliance. This is what he had to say in his own words. It comes from the times when Hibs used to go with United, and in particular Oldham. Wrexham had a few run-ins with Oldham over the years, and on one particular occasion got ambushed on a bus. Celtic, due to their rivalry with both Hibs and United, struck up a friendship with us, and on the odd occasion sided with Wrexham through a few mutual friends from previous meetings. This was in the early to mid-90s, and both sides have stayed friendly over the years and visit each other a couple of times a year. All very lovely and cosy. Something like that anyway. Maybe someone more informed can fill you in properly. And then, a Celtic lad on the forum responded with this comment. Aye, that's basically it. And because of Cliftonville's links with the Celts, Wrexham also visit us every now and then. Top lads. I just want to give the Jungle Boys a bit of a mention, because they are part of Celtic's history, and they predate the Green Brigade, and actually there was a few lads that were part of the Jungle Boys that went on to play part in the formation of the Green Brigade. One notable organiser or member of the Jungle Boys was Brendan Sweeney, who was one of the members of the important Celts for Change group back in the early 90s. The group were primarily responsible for organising the large displays at the Premier matches and European games, which included the very impressive flag-waving displays and banners. They were a huge success, and pictures of the displays were passed around forums across the football world. As a measure of fan participation in football, it put to shame the more corporate-driven organised displays in practice in England's Premier League. The displays enhanced the reputation of the club and our support, and many travelling opposition fans like to come to even just see the support in action on our big nights. It made a marked difference for the players on the pitch, and was a major advantage that was a foundation stone in our grand home record. The group also tried to get a section in the ground for people to relocate to in order to create a singing section, and in all honesty, this was touch and go in success. It wasn't until the Green Brigade really got established that a singing section truly worked. To publicise the groups and finance their activities, they maintained a general forum, sold programmes, and had a membership which was open to anyone. Subscriptions and donations were always welcome to help them in their efforts. The group was very much apolitical and ecumenical in its core support and numbers, and all were welcome, and assistance was always required, even in the smallest of ways on match days. However, the Green Brigade started to take the limelight. Generally, their membership was younger and attracted the more active of the support, and this was at a cost to the Jungle Boys. Younger supporters with more energy and time on their hands is vital to any group, and so in time the Green Brigade became the predominant group, and the influence of the Jungle Boys diminished. It shouldn't be taken that the Jungle Boys were less important. They had made a great impact, and without them the Green Brigade might not have been, and that group certainly learnt off the Jungle Boys' efforts. Sadly, on the 30th December 2010, the Jungle Boys decided to fold. The Green Brigade was there to fill the void, and were a bigger attraction to young followers who wanted to get involved. The Green Brigade is a Celtic FC Ultras group which formed during the summer of 2006. Despite the Celtic support and their home, Celtic Park, having had a laudable reputation for some time, it was the period following the renovation of Celtic Park that saw the support, especially at home, become somewhat complacent and perhaps no longer deserving of its proud status. With a few early meetings in Glasgow pubs discussing the dire state of the Celtic support, ultra culture and influence, the role of politics within football, and how all are or could be linked with supporting Celtic, the Green Brigade was founded. With the proud and unique history of Celtic, with the special values and ethos ingrained within, then the Celtic support had always maintained a left-leaning reputation. Racism and discrimination would not be tolerated, and you'd often see shows of solidarity with causes from Ireland to Palestine. As such, the Green Brigade being an anti-fascist group was fairly natural. Given the depressingly draconian way in which football in Britain is policed and stewarded, plus the fact that most fans simply accepted their overzealous nature, then it would take some time before the Green Brigade began to make its mark. Having set out its stall as not only an ultras group, where the concept and style was not only alien in practice in Britain, but totally misunderstood, but as an openly political one, then most people, including many Celtic fans, not only criticised, but mocked and predicted a very short future. Such attitudes would soon change though. The Green Brigade made a humble start in the face of doubt, suspicion and repressive actions from stewards, police and even their own club. Its early focus was to build on its small membership with the right people, whilst demonstrating the positive attributes they would bring to the Celtic support. In time, the small banners grew to larger banners, to more frequent banners, to small typos, to more frequent typos, to larger typos. Similarly, the group found its home early within Section 111 of Celtic Park, and gradually built on its presence here year on year. I have talked a lot about history, but really this video is about the football hooligan, or ultra firms linked to Celtic. So, I would like to jump back into a few more true stories of rows and battles Celtic have had with other firms, including a good one in Blackpool. Let's get back to John O'Kane, as he recalls times from the golden age of football violence. These are his own words. Season 1998 was a momentous one for Celtic, with the club celebrating its centenary. It was also a season that saw the CSC claim some notable victories, the first of which was on English soil, against Scottish opposition this time. The last weekend in September is a traditional holiday for the people of Glasgow and usually results in a mass exodus to Blackpool. A large crowd of Celtic lads had decided we would go down for the weekend and let our hair down. Most of the crew left on the Friday morning to get the benefit of the full weekend, but a few of us couldn't make it until the Saturday due to work commitments. We arrived in Blackpool at about lunchtime on the Saturday and made our way to the digs where most of the boys were staying. We quickly found out about events the previous night and the running battles that had taken place with Motherwell, who had a healthy mob down with them. According to reports, our crowd had come across Motherwell outside a club at the Central Pier. At first, there wasn't any fighting, but just the usual banter, until somebody from our mob tossed a glass into the Motherwell boys. Motherwell steamed in and chased Celtic to a pub, where most of our lads were drinking. They came out on hearing the commotion, and soon a good toe-to-toe fight was in progress, until the police arrived and began arresting some lads. The two sides were separated, with the Celtic lads being escorted along the promenade to their digs. With us arriving on the Saturday, our numbers totalled about 30, along with the addition of a couple of Hibs boys who had come down. I wasn't happy about their presence, as one of them was the fat controller who had come up to Sawton to see me. I left it for the moment, as our main concern was dealing with Motherwell. It was decided we would attack their hotel, as we knew where they were staying. We split into 3 groups of about 10, with one crowd going direct to the front entrance to entice them out, and the other 2 crowds lying in wait at opposite sides of the hotel. On seeing our crowd at their door, Motherwell came steaming out and fell perfectly into our trap. We soon had them running for cover back indoors, and some lads followed them. Soon plant pots and other garden ornaments were being hurled through the windows of the hotel. The familiar sound of police sirens could soon be heard, and that was the signal for us to disperse and make our way to a pub that was the planned meeting place. When the police did arrive, Motherwell were ordered out of their hotel and returned home, cutting their break short. The fat controller and his mates made excuses and followed suit, as they must have known they were going to be next to get attacked. With Motherwell out of the way, our attention turned to enjoying ourselves and getting laid. It wasn't too hard to pick up a bird, and soon Big Tonto and me got hold of a couple of girls from Belfast. They were quite rough, but well up for it. We decided to take them back to our digs and left the club. Tonto had the keys to the dorm-like room, which 6 or 7 of us were sharing. He got there just before me and locked himself in with his bird, while I went to the bar for a drink. I thought I would give him a bit of privacy and didn't go back to the room for about half an hour. However, he had other plans and had put a wardrobe against the door. Nobody else could get in. By this time, everyone else was arriving back at the digs. Some of them had birds and wanted to get back into the room. Big Tonto was having none of it, and no matter how hard we tried, he wouldn't let us in. I don't think he even shagged the bird. Knowing him, he probably fell asleep. The rest of us had to double up in the other rooms. The rest of the weekend was good fun and had helped to strengthen the bond that was growing among the hardcore of the crew. A few weeks after Blackpool, we were to meet the Hibs boys again, this time in the centre circle of the pitch at Easter Road. Hibs, by this time, had established themselves as the mob everyone wanted to turn over. They were widely regarded as the top firm in Scotland. Not only did they have numbers, but they also had a lot of game boys and seemed to be very organised. Celtic had a big crew, and we had claimed a couple of notable scalps in the run-up to the game against Hibs. We had played them in a cup game at Easter Road on a Wednesday night and had come back to Glasgow with a feather in our caps, as only 25 of us had travelled through and put up a good show without being turned over. There was a rumour going about the crew that somebody had brought a CS gas grenade with them back from a TA training camp and would be taking it to Easter Road. We met at Queen Street Station on the Saturday morning and awaited the arrival of our various mobs. It soon became clear that the rumour regarding the gas was indeed true. This was getting a bit heavy, and we had to decide how best to deal with it. Those of us who had been involved with the serious assault at Hearts were naturally uneasy about being caught up in another serious incident. We decided to send the babes and the bulk of the crew through on the football special, while some of us would get a service train and meet them there. The journey to Easter Road was quite uneventful for those of us who had travelled behind the bulk of the crew. However, When we got to the small railway bridge that leads to the away end, we were met by a small group of Hibs. One of them picked me out and asked for a square go. I eyed him up and fancied my chances, as he looked younger and smaller than me. I threw a punch in his direction, which didn't connect as he was much quicker than me, and simply ducked to the side while unleashing a volley of punches with the accuracy of a trained fighter. I was glad when an undercover cop came over and stopped the fight. He warned us about our behaviour and told me to pick on someone my own size. Considering the black eye that was beginning to appear on my face, it was quite ironic. We made our way to the stadium and took our place on the uncovered terrace behind one of the goals. Most of our crew were standing beside the fence, which separated the away fans from the home support. Hibs were gathered under the enclosure, which ran one length of the pitch, facing the main stand. The first half passed without major incident, with only a couple of coins being thrown at one another. However, early in the second half, we were told that somebody was going to throw the grenade. A few of us stood away from the main group. They began to bounce up and down, singing some ridiculous song, when all of a sudden there was a loud bang coming from the direction of the Hibs end. A large cloud of smoke began to rise and spread out, engulfing all those who were in the shed. People began to clamber over the fence and onto the pitch, choking and spluttering with tears streaming down their faces. The Celtic lads were jumping up and down in jubilation, unaware of the large cloud of smoke heading towards us. Soon, we were piling over the fence and onto the pitch to escape the noxious gas. Hibs had gathered in the middle of the pitch, preparing to attack us once we were over the fence. The scene was chaotic, with paramedics and police running all over the place attending to the injured. Our crew gathered in the goalmouth, where we tried to regain our composure. There were a lot of lads suffering the effects of the gas. As we grouped up, the Celtic support that were in the terrace behind the goal began to vent their anger towards us. There was the usual chant of casuals get to F, as a hail of coins rained down on those of us in the goal mouth. In an effort to escape the barrage of missiles, a lot of our lads surged forward in the direction of the 50 or so CCS who had assembled near the halfway line. This seemed to take the Hibs firm by surprise. They must have thought that we were charging them, but in reality we were running away from the constant stream of coins raining down on us. However, intentional or not, we managed to run the CCS towards the other side of the pitch. The police mounted division had now entered the stadium and focused their attention on escorting our crew out of the ground. Once outside, we were met by a small group of the Hibs baby crew, who attempted to attack us. The mounted police again intervened, driving back the young Hibs boys. Our crew had numbered a couple of hundred when we were assembled in the goalmouth, but now, as we stood outside the stadium, it was very noticeable that a lot of lads had deserted us. It was clear that many of the crew had decided they didn't fancy the walk back to the train station, in the knowledge that the CCS would be hell-bent on revenge. I witnessed some boys buying Celtic scarves from the vendors, while others had managed to get taxis or had slipped away onto the terrace to mingle with the Celtic support. This left about 50 or 60 of us to face running the gauntlet from the stadium to the safety of Waverley Station. As we turned onto Easter Road, we could see groups standing at every corner and pub door. We tried to stick together as a unit, but this was easier said than done. It was now dark, which made it difficult to keep an eye on everyone in the crew. The CCS were attacking us from all directions, and we were taking one hell of a beating. The police offered no respite, as they seemed to be turning a blind eye, probably thinking that we deserved a good kicking. We are at the end now. I could have gone on and on. There is so much more to tell, especially about current day, and like them or not, the Celtic firms are back on the scene with more numbers than ever. They are on the rise. I am sure you have all seen the video of them and the Rangers mob dressed in Santa hats, or the video of them arriving in Birmingham in huge numbers for the Champions League game against Villa. You cannot deny that Celtic are back. Can I also give a lot of credit to John O'Kane and his excellent book called Celtic Soccer Crew, What the Hell Do We Care? Most of the stories in this video came from that book, and I only read out a tiny fraction, so if you want more then go and buy it. I will leave a link in the description, just click on it, and it will take you straight to the book. Can I ask that, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and share it to your mates, and subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you subscribe, you will be notified when we release a new video. It could be your firm we make a video about next, so don't miss out and hit the subscribe button. You can find me on Facebook or email me if you have a good story to tell. See you next time.